They believed the freezing basement concrete was my tomb, that the darkness would swallow my screams just as my husband had crushed my ribs. But they forgot one rule: never leave a Westfall heiress alive if you declare war. When the old satellite phone in my hand lit up with the last bar of signal, I did not dial the police. I called the Grim Reaper, and he answered. My name is Julia Westfall, though for the last 3 years, the world and my husband knew me only as Julia Caldwell. To the patrons of the Seattle Public Library, I was the quiet, 32-year-old manager of the history section, a woman who wore oversized cardigans and smelled faintly of old parchment and vanilla. It was a perfect camouflage. Nobody looked twice at a librarian. Nobody suspected that the woman stamping due dates on high school textbooks was actually the youngest daughter of a Texas oil tycoon, or that I had walked away from a family fortune that could have bought the entire city block. I had changed my name and buried my past because I wanted something money could not buy. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for the 9 zeros sitting in a trust fund I refused to touch. When I met Robert, I thought I had found it. Robert Caldwell was an architect at a firm called Summit Stone Architecture. He was handsome in a safe, predictable way, with the kind of smile that made you want to cook pot roast and iron shirts. He was ambitious, certainly, but his talent was merely adequate. He saw himself as a visionary, a misunderstood genius trapped in a world of corporate constraints. I fell in love with his passion, even if it was often misguided. We bought a beautiful Victorian home in the Queen Anne neighborhood, a sprawling structure with turret windows and a wraparound porch. Robert walked through the rooms like a king surveying his kingdom, boasting to our friends that the house was the fruit of his blood and sweat. I let him have his pride. I never told him that his salary at Summit Stone barely covered the utilities. I never told him that 80% of the down payment and the monthly mortgage came from a private account I secretly maintained. Disguised as an inheritance from a non-existent great-aunt, I was happy to pay for the fantasy if it meant we could be happy, for 3 years. Our life was a calm, steady river. Then came the storm, and her name was Martha. It started on a Tuesday evening, amidst a torrential Seattle downpour. The doorbell rang, cutting through the silence of our dinner. When I opened the door, my mother-in-law stood there, soaked to the bone, clutching a plastic rosary in one hand and a battered suitcase in the other. Behind her, a taxi driver was unloading what looked like the contents of an entire apartment. Martha had the eyes of a wounded animal, wide and watery. She told us a sob story about a cruel landlord who had evicted her without notice, about a mix-up with her pension checks, about having nowhere else to go. She omitted the part about the underground gambling dens in Portland and the debts she had racked up at the slot machines, details I would only uncover later. She asked to stay for just a few weeks, just until she got back on her feet. Robert looked at me, his eyes pleading. I wanted to say no. The house was my sanctuary, my escape from the chaos of my upbringing, but I looked at Robert, and I saw the little boy who just wanted his mother to be safe. So, I nodded. I smiled the smile of a dutiful wife and welcomed the viper into our nest. It became apparent within 48 hours that Martha had no intention of leaving in a few weeks. You do not bring 5 trunks of clothes, 3 boxes of kitchen appliances, and a collection of porcelain dolls for a temporary stay. She moved into the guest room, but her presence spread through the house like black mold. The first thing to go was the silence. Martha was a woman who could not abide quiet. She filled the air with complaints, gossip, and the blaring sound of daytime talk shows. Then, she started on the furniture. I came home from work one day to find my living room rearranged. The minimalist, modern aesthetic I loved had been replaced by a cluttered, claustrophobic arrangement that centered around her favorite armchair. When I gently protested, she sniffed and wiped a non-existent tear from her eye. She said she was just trying to be helpful, that the old layout blocked the flow of positive energy. Robert, standing in the doorway, shrugged and told me it was not a big deal. He told me to let her have this one small joy. But it was never just one thing. It was 1,000 small cuts. Martha had a way of delivering insults wrapped in concern. She would watch me eat and comment on how my metabolism must be slowing down. She would run a finger over the mantelpiece and sigh about the dust. However, her favorite target was my inability to conceive. We had been trying for a baby for a year with no success, a source of private pain for me. Martha turned it into public conversation. During dinner, she would look at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. She would talk about Robert's ex-girlfriend, a woman named Vanessa who came from old money in Boston. She would say things like, Vanessa always had such wide, fertile hips, or that Vanessa knew how to keep a house properly. She painted a picture of a life Robert could have had, a life better than the one he had with me. I watched Robert across the table, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his mother to stop, but he just kept eating, his eyes fixed on his plate. Later, in the safety of our bedroom, he would give me the same tired excuse. He would say that his mother had a hard life. He would say she raised him alone and that I needed to be the bigger person. He would say, essentially, that my feelings mattered less than her comfort. I watched the man I loved transform. The Robert who used to surprise me with flowers and hold my hand during horror movies was replaced by a spineless son who was terrified of upsetting his mother. He became irritable with me, snapping at small things, echoing her criticisms. If Martha said the house was cold, Robert would turn up the thermostat without asking me. If Martha said I worked too much, Robert would suggest I cut back my hours at the library. He was being rewritten, page by page, and I was losing the main character of my own marriage. Then the invasion of privacy began. It started with small things. I would come home to find my closet door slightly ajar. My clothes would be shifted, the hangers pushed together too tightly. One afternoon, I found a lace nightgown, one I kept hidden in the back of a drawer for anniversaries, draped over the guest room chair. When I confronted her, Martha claimed she was just doing laundry and must have mixed it up, but I never put my delicates in the general hamper. She had gone into our bedroom, opened my drawers, and rifled through my most intimate possessions. The feeling of violation was physical, like a cold hand on the back of my neck. I tried to talk to Robert about boundaries. I told him that a married couple needs privacy, that his mother could not just wander into our room whenever she pleased. Robert sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. He asked me why I was being so difficult. He asked me why I hated his mother. He twisted my words until I was the villain, the cold-hearted wife trying to drive a wedge between a mother and her son. The tension in the house grew so thick, it felt like walking through water. I stopped leaving personal items around. I started locking my jewelry box, but I did not think she would be bold enough to steal cash directly from me. I was wrong. It was a Friday morning. I had withdrawn $200 in cash to pay for a restoration course I was taking. I left the bills in my wallet, which was sitting on the vanity table in our bedroom. I went downstairs to make coffee, leaving the room for no more than 15 minutes. When I returned to get my bag, the wallet felt lighter. I opened it. The slots were empty. My heart hammered against my ribs. I searched the floor, the pockets of my coat, the bathroom counter. Nothing. The money was gone. There were only 3 people in the house. I walked downstairs, my hands shaking not with fear, but with a cold, rising anger. I found them in the kitchen. Martha was humming to herself, buttering a piece of toast. Robert was reading the news on his tablet. I placed the empty wallet on the table. I asked, keeping my voice steady, if anyone had seen the $200 I had just put in there. The silence that followed was heavy. Martha stopped humming. She looked at the wallet, then at me, and her face crumbled into a mask of absolute shock. She asked if I was accusing her. She put a hand over her heart and started to hyperventilate. She cried out that she might be poor. She might be down on her luck, but she had never been a thief. I looked at Robert. I expected him to be rational. I expected him to realize that money does not vanish into thin air. Instead, he slammed his hand down on the table. He looked at me with genuine anger. He told me I was being paranoid. He said I had been forgetful lately, probably due to the stress at work. He suggested I probably spent it and forgot. Or maybe I dropped it in the car. He was gaslighting me. He was rewriting reality to protect her, or perhaps to protect himself from the truth. Martha sobbed louder, wailing about how she was a burden and should just go live on the street. Robert rushed to comfort her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and glaring at me over her gray head. He told me to apologize. He told me I was cruel. I stood there, alone in my own kitchen, surrounded by the stainless steel appliances I had paid for. Looking at the husband whose career I was subsidizing, I realized then that I was not just fighting a difficult mother-in-law, I was fighting a dynamic that had existed long before I entered the picture. I muttered a hollow apology just to silence the wailing. I said I must have been mistaken. Martha recovered with miraculous speed. She dabbed her eyes with a napkin and forgave me with a graciousness that made me want to scream. She said she understood that work stress could make people imagine terrible things. That night, I could not sleep. I wandered the house like a ghost. I went downstairs to get a glass of water, trying to wash away the bitter taste of the day. As I passed the study, I saw a sliver of light from the street lamp cutting through the darkness. The door was open. Martha was there. She was not crying. She was not frail. She was standing in front of the large mahogany bookshelf. She was not looking at the books. Her body was still, her posture predatory. She was staring at a specific spot on the third shelf. She was staring at a thick, leather-bound copy of War and Peace. It was a hollowed-out book. It was where I kept a small emergency stash of cash and the key to a safe deposit box that held the few pieces of Westfall jewelry I had kept. I had never told Robert about it. It was my secret, but the look on Martha's face told me everything. Her eyes were not just curious. They were calculating. They were the eyes of a prospector who had just struck a vein of gold. She did not know what was inside yet, but she smelled the value. She traced the spine of the book with a finger, a slow, greedy caress. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, holding my breath. The woman who had wept over an accusation of stealing $200 was now plotting a heist in my own home. I realized then that the $200 was just a test. It was a probe to see how I would react, to see how much Robert would defend her. And I had failed, or rather, they had passed. Robert had proven he would be her shield, and I had proven I would back down. She turned her head slightly, and for a second, the moonlight caught her grin. It was a smile of pure malice. I stepped back into the darkness, my blood running cold. I was not safe. My secrets were not safe, and the man sleeping upstairs was not my protector. He was her accomplice in waiting. The silence in my home had changed. It was no longer the peaceful quiet of a library sanctuary, but the heavy, pressurized silence of a waiting room before a diagnosis. The atmosphere had shifted from intrusive to predatory. Following the incident with the $200, the thefts did not stop. They evolved. It was as if my acceptance of their lie had been interpreted as permission, a green light to strip the carcass clean. It began to happen with a frequency that made my head spin. First, it was a $500 gift card for a high-end department store that I had received as a bonus from the library board. I had left it in the kitchen drawer. Tucked inside a greeting card, gone. Then, a bottle of vintage perfume, a rare scent I had purchased in Paris years ago, vanished from my vanity. It was not something one could simply misplace. It was a heavy crystal bottle, but the item that truly pierced my heart was a pair of pearl earrings. They were simple, elegant teardrops that belonged to my mother. I did not wear them often, but I checked on them religiously. When I opened the velvet box one Tuesday evening and found nothing but the indentation where the pearls had rested, I felt a physical blow to my stomach. I brought it up to Robert that night. I did not yell. I did not scream. I sat him down on the edge of our bed and spoke with the calm rationality of a woman trying to solve a puzzle. I told him about the gift card, the perfume, and the pearls. I laid out the timeline. Robert did not look at me. He continued to unbutton his shirt, his movements jerky and irritated. When he finally turned, his face was not one of concern, but of exhaustion mixed with a patronizing pity that made my blood boil. He told me that I was sounding paranoid again. He used that word like a weapon, paranoid. He asked me if I was sure I had not lost them. He suggested that perhaps the stress of the budget cuts at the library was getting to me, that I was becoming forgetful, absent-minded. He looked at me with a furrowed brow and asked, in a voice dripping with faux concern, if I thought I should see a doctor. He was suggesting, subtly but unmistakably, that I was losing my mind. This is what they call gaslighting. It is a slow poison. You start to question your own memory. Did I move the earrings? Did I use the gift card and forget? For a fleeting second, I doubted myself. But then I remembered the smirk I had seen on Martha's face in the hallway. I was not crazy. I was being hunted. Every time I tried to press the issue, Martha would initiate her performance. It was always the same script. She would be sitting in the living room, listening to our raised voices. As soon as her name was mentioned, she would gasp. Her hand would fly to her chest, clutching her blouse as if she were suffering a myocardial infarction right there on my beige carpet. She would wheeze about her palpitations, about how the stress was killing her, about how she was just a burden who should die so we could be happy. And Robert, my husband, would abandon all logic. He would rush to her, glaring at me as if I were holding a smoking gun. He would tell me to stop it. He would tell me I was upsetting her. He would prioritize her theatrical medical crisis over the theft of my property. I watched them, mother and son, locked in a dance of dysfunction where I was the audience and the victim. Then came Sarah. If Martha was the architect of my misery, Sarah was the demolition crew. Robert's younger sister arrived on a Thursday, dragging a suitcase that was far too expensive for someone who claimed to be perpetually unemployed. Sarah was 26, a woman who described herself as a content creator but mostly created debt and drama. She had the kind of entitled laziness that is usually reserved for royalty. She took over the sofa, demanding herbal teas and complaining about the strength of our Wi-Fi signal. The breaking point arrived on Saturday afternoon. We were preparing to go out for a family lunch, a charade of unity that Robert insisted upon. I walked into the living room and froze. Sarah was standing in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting a scarf around her neck. It was unmistakable. It was a vintage Hermes scarf, a vibrant splash of orange and gold silk that I had bought with my first paycheck after leaving my family. It had been missing for 3 days. The rage that surged through me was cold and clarifying. I walked up to her and asked, in a voice that trembled with suppressed fury, where she had gotten that scarf. Sarah did not even flinch. She turned to me, popping a bubble of gum, and gave a shrug that was practiced in its nonchalance. She told me she found it. I asked her where. I asked her where exactly one finds a $600 silk scarf. She looked me dead in the eye and said she found it in the trash can in the master bathroom. She said she thought I had thrown it away because it looked old. So she rescued it. The lie was so audacious, so insultingly stupid, that I was momentarily speechless. I looked at Robert, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to call out this absurdity. Who throws a Hermes scarf in the trash? But Robert did not laugh. He looked at his sister, then at his mother, who was watching from the armchair with hawk-like intensity, and finally at me. He took a breath, and I saw the decision form in his eyes. He chose the path of least resistance. He chose them. He turned to me and asked why I was making a scene. He said that if Sarah said she found it in the trash. She found it in the trash. He told me that I had been complaining about clutter lately. So maybe I threw it out by mistake in a fit of cleaning. He looked at me with a hard, warning stare and told me to apologize to his sister for accusing her of theft. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. He wanted me to apologize. He wanted me to validate the lie. At that moment, the man I married died. The Robert who had once held my hand and promised to protect me was gone, replaced by this weak, compromised creature who would burn me alive to keep his mother and sister warm. I swallowed my pride. It tasted like ash. I muttered a short, clipped apology to Sarah. She smirked, a triumphant, ugly twisting of her lips, and patted the scarf possessively. I turned and walked away. Not to cry, but to plan. I realized then that I was completely isolated. I was a stranger in my own home, surrounded by hostilities, but I needed to know the depth of the rot. Was Robert just a coward, or was he a co-conspirator? That evening, while Robert was in the shower, I did something I had never done in 3 years of marriage. I opened his laptop. I knew his password. It was the name of the first street he lived on, followed by his birth year. I logged into our joint bank account, the one where his salary and my inheritance contributions mingled. The numbers on the screen told a story far more damning than any missing scarf. There were withdrawals, regular, significant cash withdrawals that I had never authorized. $3,000 on the first of the month, $1,500 2 weeks later, $4,000 just yesterday. I cross-referenced the dates with the calendar. Every withdrawal coincided with one of Martha's migraines or Sarah's car troubles. Robert was not just turning a blind eye to their behavior, he was actively funding it. He was draining our savings, my money, to pay off what I could only assume were gambling debts or loans from dangerous people. He was stealing from me to save them. The betrayal was total. It was financial, emotional, and psychological. I closed the laptop, my hands steady. The time for confrontation was over. Confrontation required a shared reality, and we were no longer living in the same world. I needed proof. I needed undeniable, high-definition evidence that would stand up in a court of law and, more importantly, in the court of my own conscience when I destroyed them. The next day, I took a long lunch break. I drove to a specialty electronics store on the other side of the city, wearing sunglasses and a hat. I paid cash for 2 items. The first was a smoke detector that housed a high-resolution, wide-angle camera with a battery life of 30 days. The second was a standard-looking electrical outlet faceplate that contained a motion-activated lens. I waited until 2 days later, when Robert took his mother and sister to a matinee movie. Leaving me alone in the house, I worked quickly. I replaced the smoke detector in the living room, positioning it so it covered the seating area and the entrance to the hallway. I installed the outlet camera in our bedroom. Angling it directly at the wall where the safe was hidden behind the painting, I connected them to a secure, hidden application on my phone. The feeds were crisp and clear. Now, I needed to bait the trap. I needed to offer them something so irresistible that their greed would override any lingering caution. That evening at dinner, the atmosphere was tense. Sarah was scrolling on her phone at the table, and Martha was complaining about the texture of the roast chicken. I waited for a lull in the conversation. I cleared my throat and put on a mask of weary resignation. I told Robert that I'd been thinking about our finances. I mentioned that I was worried about the market and that perhaps we should have some liquid assets on hand. I looked at Martha, catching her eye, and dropped the bait. I said that I was considering selling the antique diamond set my grandmother had left me. I described it in lush detail. The heavy platinum setting, the clarity of the stones, the fact that it was appraised at over $50,000. I lied about the value. It was worth much more. But $50,000 was a number that greedy people could comprehend. I saw the change in the room immediately. Martha stopped chewing. Sarah looked up from her phone. Robert went still. I continued, keeping my voice casual. I said I had moved the set from the bank deposit box to the wall safe behind the painting in our bedroom just yesterday, intending to take it to an appraiser next week. I said I was nervous having it in the house, but it was just for a few days. The silence that followed was electric. It was the silence of sharks smelling blood in the water. Martha exchanged a quick, loaded glance with Robert. Sarah licked her lips. They asked no questions. They offered no advice. They just absorbed the information, their minds already spending the money. That night, lying in bed next to Robert, the darkness felt heavy. I could hear his breathing, steady and rhythmic, the breathing of a man who thought he was in control. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the cold hum of the hidden camera in the outlet across the room. I turned my head slightly and looked at his profile. This was the man I had vowed to love and cherish. Now, he was just a target. I could smell the faint, stale scent of his mother's cheap perfume clinging to him, a reminder of where his loyalties lay. He shifted in his sleep, his hand brushing against my arm. I did not pull away. I lay there, frozen, letting the disgust wash over me like a tide. I knew what was coming. I had handed them the key to their own destruction. Tomorrow, I would leave the house. I would give them the opportunity they so desperately wanted. And when they took it, when they showed their true faces to the unblinking eye of the camera, I would be ready. The wife who apologized for stolen scarves was dead. In her place lay a Westfall, and we do not forgive, we settle scores. The lie rolled off my tongue with a smoothness that frightened me. I stood in the hallway, gripping the handle of my overnight bag, and told Robert that a water pipe had burst in the archives of the Portland branch. I told him I had to drive down immediately to oversee the emergency transfer of rare manuscripts and that I would likely be gone until tomorrow evening. Robert performed his role to perfection. He furrowed his brow, feigning concern for my stress levels. He kissed my forehead, his lips dry and cool, and told me to drive safely. He said he would hold down the fort. Behind him, Martha was sitting in her armchair, sipping tea, not even bothering to look up. Sarah was nowhere to be seen, likely sleeping off another afternoon of doing absolutely nothing. I walked out the door, got into my car, and drove away. But I did not go to Portland. I drove 5 miles west to a nondescript chain hotel near the airport. I checked into a room on the 4th floor. A sterile box with beige walls and the smell of industrial cleaner. I did not unpack. I sat at the small desk, placed my phone on the stand, and opened the secure application I had installed. The screen flickered, then resolved into 2 distinct feeds. Channel 1 was the living room. Channel 2 was the master bedroom. I watched myself drive away on the delay. I saw my car disappear down the street, and then I saw the transformation. It was instantaneous. The moment my taillights vanished, the performance ended. Robert closed the front door and locked it, but he did not look sad. He did not look like a man missing his wife. He leaned his back against the wood and let out a whoop of excitement. "She is gone!" he shouted. Martha was up from her chair faster than I had ever seen her move. The woman who claimed she needed a cane to walk to the bathroom was suddenly spry. Sarah emerged from the kitchen holding a bottle of my expensive Pinot Noir. Already uncorked, they gathered in the living room like a coven of witches celebrating a successful curse. I watched, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, as they toasted to my absence, but this was just the warm-up. "Did she leave it?" Martha asked, her eyes gleaming with a hunger that made her look decades younger. "She left it," Robert said. He reached into his pocket. He did not pull out his own keys. He pulled out a single, silver key. I gasped in the empty hotel room. That was the spare key to the wall safe. I kept it on a separate ring, hidden in a velvet pouch inside my winter coat in the hall closet. I had checked it 2 days ago. It had been there. He must have swiped it the moment I went to the bathroom before leaving. He had been planning this. "Come on," Robert said. "Let's see what the little librarian has been hiding." They moved as a pack up the stairs. I switched the feed to Channel 2. The bedroom camera, hidden in the outlet, gave me a perfect, low-angle view of the scene. Robert walked straight to the painting of the seascape that hung above the dresser. He ripped it off the wall and tossed it onto the bed. He did not treat my things with care. He treated them with contempt. He inserted the key. The safe door swung open. Martha pushed him aside, her hands shaking with greed. She reached in and pulled out the velvet box containing the diamond set. She opened it, and even through the grain of the camera feed, I saw the sparkle. These were stones from the Westfall vault, flawless and heavy. "Oh, my God," Sarah whispered, leaning over her mother's shoulder. "Are those real?" "They are real," Martha cackled. She held a necklace up to her throat, preening in the mirror. "Look at the clarity. Robert, this is not costume jewelry. This is old money." Robert was rummaging through the rest of the safe. He pulled out a stack of bonds and a few watches I had stored there. He turned to the camera, though he did not know he was being watched, and said something that froze the blood in my veins. "The bitch has been holding out on us," he said. His voice was full of sneering malice. "She plays the poor little orphan act, pretends she lives paycheck to paycheck, but she has been sitting on a gold mine." "It does not matter," Martha said, stuffing the necklace into her pocket. "It is ours now. You are her husband. What is hers is yours. That is the law, isn't it?" "It is moral law. At least," Robert laughed. "We will sell the diamonds first. That fence in Tacoma will give us 40 cents on the dollar. No questions asked. That is enough for the down payment on the Porsche and to clear your debts, Ma." "And me?" Sarah whined. "What about me?" "Take the bags," Robert said, gesturing to my closet. "She has 3 or 4 designer bags in there she never uses. Sell them online. Keep the cash." I watched as they dismantled my life. Sarah ran to the closet and started throwing my handbags onto the floor. Martha was still fondling the jewelry. Robert was counting the cash from the safe. They were not just stealing. They were violating. They were laughing at my stupidity, mocking the love I had given them. I sat there in that hotel room, and something inside me snapped. It was not a loud break. It was a quiet, irrevocable severance. The part of me that was Julia Caldwell, the gentle librarian who wanted a family, died in that chair. The woman who stood up was Julia Westfall. I should have called the police. I should have recorded the footage and sent it to a lawyer. That would have been the smart, safe thing to do, but I was not feeling safe. I was feeling a rage so pure and white-hot that it blinded me to reason. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to see the moment their victory turned to ash. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the hotel room. The drive back was a blur of streetlights and rain. I drove 20 miles over the speed limit, weaving through traffic, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I played Robert's words over and over in my head. The bitch has been holding out on us. He had never loved me. He had tolerated me. He had used me as a placeholder until he could extract value. I screeched into the driveway, blocking Robert's car. The house was blazing with light. They were so confident, so arrogant, that they had not even drawn the curtains. I did not use my key. I slammed my shoulder against the front door, bursting into the hallway like a storm. The scene in the living room froze. Robert was sitting on the sofa, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Martha was wearing my diamond necklace. Sarah was browsing on her phone, one of my Louis Vuitton bags sitting on her lap. They looked at me in stunned silence. For a second, nobody moved. The only sound was the heavy rhythm of my breathing and the rain pounding on the roof. "Julia?" Robert stammered, standing up. "You are supposed to be in Portland." I did not speak. I marched over to the coffee table and slammed my phone down. The video feed was still playing, looping the moment Robert opened the safe. "I saw everything," I said, my voice low and trembling with fury. "I saw you take the key. I saw you open the safe. I heard what you called me." Robert looked at the phone, then at me. The color drained from his face, but only for a moment. "Take that off." I pointed at Martha. "Take my necklace off right now." Martha clutched the diamonds, her eyes darting to Robert. "Robert, she is hysterical." "I am not hysterical," I screamed. "I am done. I want a divorce. Robert, I want you, your thief of a mother, and your parasite sister out of my house tonight. I am calling the police." I reached for the landline phone on the side table. That was when the air in the room changed. Robert did not apologize. He did not beg. He did not drop to his knees. He looked at me, and his expression shifted. The mask of the bumbling, henpecked husband dissolved. His jaw set. His eyes went cold and hard, devoid of any warmth or humanity. It was like looking at a stranger wearing my husband's face. He walked past me, calm and deliberate. He went to the front door and turned the deadbolt. Click. Then he engaged the chain lock. Click. He turned back to me. He walked to the wall where the phone jack was connected. He reached down and yanked the cord out of the socket. He tossed the wire onto the floor. "You are not calling anyone," Robert said. His voice was steady, terrifyingly so. My stomach dropped. What are you doing? Open that door. You think you can just waltz in here and threaten my family? Robert said. Stepping closer, you think you can ruin my career? Throw my mother in jail? Over some rocks? They are my rocks, I shouted, backing away. They are my property. You are my wife, Robert sneered. You belong to me. Everything you have belongs to me. I tried to be nice. Julia, I tried to do this the easy way, but you had to spy. You had to be a sneak. Martha stood up. She was no longer the frail old woman. She moved to stand beside her son, her face twisted into a mask of cruelty. Do not let her go, Robert, Martha hissed. If she goes to the police, you are finished. Summit Stone will fire you. We will lose everything. She will destroy us. She won't destroy anyone, Robert said. He rolled up his sleeves. I looked at Sarah. She was still sitting on the couch, watching us with wide eyes, but she did not look horrified. She looked excited. She looked like she was watching a reality show that had just gotten good. Give me my phone, I said, reaching for the mobile device I had thrown on the table. Robert was faster. He swiped the phone off the table and smashed it against the brick fireplace. The screen shattered. The device went dead. Now, Robert said, cracking his knuckles. We need to have a conversation about respect, Julia, and about where the rest of the money is. I realized then, with a jolt of primal terror, that I had made a catastrophic mistake. I had cornered a rat, but I had forgotten that rats have teeth. I was alone in a house with 3 people who had spent months dehumanizing me, who viewed me not as a person but as a resource to be mined. And now that the mining was threatened, they were ready to remove the obstacle. I backed up until I hit the bookshelf. Robert kept coming. His shadow stretched long across the floor, swallowing me whole. Mom, Robert said without looking back. Check the kitchen door. Make sure it is locked. Already done, Martha said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Teach her a lesson. Bobby, show her who is the man of this house. I looked around for a weapon, for an escape, for anything, but there was only the locked door, the rain against the windows, and the man I had married coming to break me. The first blow did not come from a fist. It came from the realization that the man standing before me was not merely angry, he was lethal. Robert lunged, covering the distance between the fireplace and the bookshelf in 2 strides. I reacted on instinct, the kind of primal survival mechanism that lies dormant until the predator is at your throat. I grabbed a heavy ceramic vase from the shelf, a blue and white piece I had bought at an estate sale, and swung it with every ounce of terror-fueled strength I possessed. It connected with his shoulder, shattering into 100 sharp shards. Robert grunted, stumbling back, but he did not fall. He was fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and the desperate, cornered greed of a man who sees his future slipping away. I tried to run past him toward the kitchen door, my only remaining exit, but I had forgotten the others. I felt fingers tangle in my hair. Yanking my head back with agonizing force, it was Sarah, the girl who claimed she was too weak to work, too delicate for manual labor, was now dragging me backward with the strength of a banshee. I screamed and drove my elbow back, connecting with something soft, her stomach. I hoped, but before I could break free, a second pair of hands clamped around my ankles. Martha, the old woman, had dropped to her knees, not in prayer, but to anchor me to the floor. She dug her fingernails into my calves, screeching instructions to her son. It was a pack hunt. They were wolves, and I was the deer they had successfully separated from the herd. Hold her, Martha yelled, her voice unrecognizable. Do not let her kick, I thrashed, kicking out wildly, my heel connecting with Martha's shoulder. But they were too many. Robert recovered from the blow to his shoulder. He did not come at me with his hands this time. He reached toward the umbrella stand by the door, where his golf bag was leaning. He pulled out a driver. The metal head caught the light of the chandelier. A grim halo for a domestic executioner. Robert, no! I screamed, holding up my hands. Robert, think about what you are doing. He did not think. He swung. The club struck my left side. Just below the armpit, I heard the sound before I felt the pain. It was a wet, sickening crunch, like stepping on dry branches in a quiet forest. My ribs gave way. The air was driven from my lungs in a violent whoosh, leaving me gasping, fish-like, on the carpet. The pain was blinding. A white-hot spike that drove itself into the center of my chest. I collapsed, curling into a fetal ball to protect my vital organs. But Robert was not finished. He stood over me, his chest heaving, his eyes void of any recognition. "You want to leave?" he panted. "You want to walk out of here and ruin me?" He raised the club again. This time, he aimed lower. He aimed for the leg that Martha was pinning down. The impact on my left shin was absolute. It shattered the tibia. The sound was different this time. Sharper. Louder. A dry crack that echoed off the walls. The agony was instantaneous and overwhelming. It was not just pain. It was a biological alarm screaming that the body was broken. My vision tunneled. I opened my mouth to scream, but only a ragged, gargling sob came out. Martha let go of my leg, scrambling back to avoid the blood that began to seep through my jeans. Sarah stood over me, her hands covering her mouth, but she was not looking away. She was watching with a morbid fascination. "That should keep her home," Robert said, dropping the golf club onto the sofa as if it were a toy. He looked down at me, at the heap of broken bones and shattered trust that was his wife. "You are not going anywhere, Julia. You are going to stay right here until you sign every single asset transfer I put in front of you." I tried to crawl. I tried to drag myself toward the door using only my elbows, but the pain in my leg caused me to black out for a second. When I came to, Robert and Sarah were grabbing my arms. "Open the cellar," Robert commanded. Martha hurried to the kitchen pantry. Behind the shelving unit was a heavy oak door that led to the old Prohibition-era wine cellar. We had never used it. It was damp, smelled of mildew, and most importantly for them, it was soundproofed with thick concrete and earth. They dragged me across the floor. My broken leg trailed behind, bumping against the hardwood, sending fresh waves of nausea through me. Total darkness enveloped me. The first few hours were a delirium of agony. My leg throbbed with a pulse that felt like a sledgehammer. My ribs burned with every shallow breath I took. I lay on the freezing concrete, shivering uncontrollably. I reached into my pockets, praying that by some miracle they had missed something, but they were empty. No phone, no wallet, no keys. I was stripped of everything that connected me to the civilized world. I realized then that I was dying. Not quickly, but slowly. Infection would set in. Dehydration would set in. Shock was already setting in. I was 32 years old, an heiress to an empire, and I was going to die in a damp basement in Seattle because I fell in love with a mediocre man. Time lost its meaning. There was no sunrise, no sunset. There was only the darkness and the pain. I drifted in and out of consciousness. I dreamed of Texas. I dreamed of the oil fields, the heat, the smell of crude and dust. I dreamed of my father. Sometime later, it could have been a day, it could have been 2, the door opened. A slice of yellow light cut through the gloom. I squinted, my eyes unaccustomed to the brightness. Something landed near my head with a wet slap, a plastic bottle of water, then a paper plate wrapped in foil. "Eat up, princess," Sarah's voice floated down. "Mom made meatloaf. It is a little burnt, but beggars cannot be choosers." The door slammed again. I dragged myself toward the water. My throat was so dry it felt like sandpaper. I drank greedily, choking on the liquid, spilling it down my chin. I opened the foil. It was indeed burnt meatloaf and a scoop of cold mashed potatoes. It was scraps. It was what you feed a dog you keep in the yard. I ate it. I ate it because I needed the energy to hate them. The pattern established itself. Once a day, the door would open. Water and scraps were thrown down. Sometimes it was Sarah, sometimes Martha. They never came down. They stayed at the top of the stairs, afraid of the smell, afraid of the monster they had created. But Robert came down. He came down on what I estimated was the third day. He brought a battery-powered camping lantern and a folding chair. He set the lantern on a dusty crate, illuminating the hell I was living in. I was filthy. My clothes were torn and stained. My leg was swollen to twice its normal size, the skin purple and tight. Robert sat in the chair. Dressed in a crisp blue suit, he looked fresh, clean, smelling of shower gel and coffee. The contrast was a deliberate act of psychological warfare. "You look terrible, honey," he said, crossing his legs. He pulled a sheaf of papers from his jacket pocket. "I did some digging through your filing cabinet. I found the statements for the Vanguard accounts and the trusts in the Caymans. Very impressive. Julia, you are worth more than I thought." He uncapped a fountain pen, my fountain pen, a gift from my graduation, and held it out. "These are power of attorney forms and asset transfer authorizations," he said calmly. "Sign them, backdate them to last week. Once the money is in my account, I will call an ambulance. We will tell them you fell down the stairs. A tragic accident." I looked at the pen. I looked at his face. I knew he was lying. He would never call an ambulance. As soon as I signed those papers, I was a loose end. A dead wife is a tragedy. A divorced wife who was tortured is a prison sentence. He intended to kill me. "I cannot write," I croaked. My voice was a rusted hinge. "My hand is shaking." "Try," Robert said, his voice hardening. He shoved the papers onto the floor in front of me. I took the pen. My hand trembled violently. It was not an act. I was weak, feverish. But my mind, sharpened by pain, was working. I leaned over the paper. I saw the line for the signature. I pressed the pen to the paper, but I did not write Julia Caldwell. I scribbled a jagged, illegible loop. I skipped the middle initial. On the next page, I signed Julia West. I altered the pressure, making it look like the scrawl of a dying woman, which I was, but also ensuring that any bank algorithm would flag it immediately as a mismatch. "Good," Robert said, snatching the papers back without checking them closely. He was too eager. "See? That was not so hard." He stood up, towering over me. "I will be back tomorrow for the rest. There are some offshore accounts that need specific codes. You will give them to me." He took the lantern. The darkness rushed back in as he ascended the stairs. "Robert," I whispered before the door closed. "Why?" He paused, his hand on the knob. "Because you made me feel small, Julia. And with this money, I will never be small again." The lock clicked. I lay in the dark. The image of his polished shoes burned into my retina. I was alone again. The fever was rising. My leg felt like it was on fire. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. But in that fevered sleep, a voice came to me. It was not Robert's. It was deep, gravelly, and smelled of cigar smoke. "Little girl," my father had said to me 10 years ago, on the night I told him I was leaving to live a normal life. "You think the world is kind because I built a wall of money around you, but the world is a slaughterhouse. If you walk out that door, you leave your armor behind. But remember this, you are a Westfall. If someone tries to eat you, you choke them on the bones." I opened my eyes in the pitch black. The pain was still there, but the fear was gone. I was done being Julia Caldwell, the librarian. I was done being the victim. I reached into the lining of the old denim jacket I was wearing, a jacket I had put on the day I tried to escape, a jacket I had owned since I was 22. My hands shook as I felt the seam near the waist. It was ripped. I dug my fingers inside the lining. They had taken my phone. They had taken my wallet. But they did not know about the lining. They did not know about the failsafe. My fingers brushed against cold metal. It was small, rectangular, no bigger than a matchbox. I pulled it out, the tiny satellite phone. Ethan had given it to me. Ethan Blackwood, my father's head of security, the man who had taught me how to shoot, how to drive, and how to disappear. He had slipped it into my pocket the day I left. "For when the world proves your father right," he had said. I pressed the power button. A tiny green light blinked in the darkness. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. 1 bar of signal. It was enough. I was not going to die in this basement. I was going to turn this slaughterhouse against the butchers. The fever did not creep up on me. It ravaged me. It was a wildfire sweeping through dry brush, consuming my logic, my sense of time, and my tether to reality. The pain in my leg had transcended mere agony. It had become a living, pulsing entity, a second heart beating a rhythm of poison through my veins. The infection from the compound fracture was spreading. I could feel the heat radiating from my shin, a stark contrast to the bone-deep chill of the damp basement floor. I drifted in and out of a delirium that felt like drowning in warm syrup. In the darkness, the walls of the Seattle basement dissolved, replaced by the vast, arid horizons of Texas. I was no longer the 32-year-old wife of a mediocre architect. I was the 22-year-old daughter of Tobias Westfall. Standing on the porch of a ranch that was larger than some European countries, the ghosts of my past, whom I had spent a decade running from, crowded around me in the dark. I saw my father, cold and distant as a marble statue. I saw the endless parade of suitors who wanted the Westfall name more than they wanted me. But mostly, I saw him, Ethan Blackwood. In my fever dreams, he was standing guard at the door of the cellar, his silhouette massive and unmoving. Ethan was not just a bodyguard to the lonely girl growing up in a golden cage. He was the only reality I knew. He was 15 years my senior, a former Special Forces operator whose silence was louder than my father's shouting. He was the man who taught me how to bandage a scraped knee when my mother was too busy with charity galas. He was the man who taught me that the only person you can trust is the one who is paid to take a bullet for you, and even then, you keep one eye open. I blinked, and the image of Ethan faded, leaving me back in the suffocating blackness of my prison. My throat was parched, my tongue swollen. I needed to focus. I needed to remember why I was holding the small rectangular object in my hand, the satellite phone. I had found it in the lining of the old denim jacket, the one piece of clothing I had refused to throw away. It was my armor. I remembered the night I left home. It was raining, a rare torrential downpour that turned the Texas dust into red mud. I had packed a single bag, determined to escape the weight of my inheritance. Ethan had been waiting for me at the service gate. He did not try to stop me. He did not tell my father. He simply handed me this jacket. "Take it," he had said, his voice gravel over velvet. "You are a sheep walking into a forest of wolves. Julia, you think you want to be normal. You think you want to be vulnerable. But when the world breaks you, and it will break you will need this." He had sewn the phone into the lining himself. It was military grade, designed for deep cover extraction. Use it only when you are dying. He had warned, because once you make that call, there is no going back. The life you built will be scorched earth. I looked at the device in my trembling hand. The small green light of the power indicator was the only star in my sky. The battery icon was flashing red. It had held its charge for 10 years, a miracle of dormant technology, but it was fading fast. I had minutes, perhaps seconds. I did not have to look up the number. It was burned into my memory, a sequence of digits I had repeated to myself like a prayer during the darkest nights of my marriage, though I had never dared to dial it. Until now. My thumb hovered over the keypad. I was shaking so badly I was afraid I would drop it. If I dropped it, if the battery died, I would die here. I would become a pile of bones in a forgotten cellar, and Robert and Martha would spend my fortune on sports cars and plastic surgery. The rage cut through the fever like a blade. No, they would not win. I pressed the call button. There was no ringing tone, just a sharp series of clicks, the sound of an encrypted signal bouncing off a satellite in low Earth orbit, seeking its master. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The line opened. "I am listening, Miss." The voice was instantaneous. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no asking who was calling. Ethan Blackwood answered the phone as if he had been sitting by it for a decade, waiting for this exact moment. His voice was exactly as I remembered it. Calm, deep, devoid of fear, yet carrying an undercurrent of lethal capability. It was the voice of a man who controlled violence the way an artist controls paint. I tried to speak, but my throat seized. I was crying. The tears hot and stinging against my grime-streaked face, I gasped for air, forcing the words past the wall of pain in my chest. "Ethan," I whispered. It came out as a broken croak. "I am here," he replied. His tone did not shift, but I could hear the background noise on his end cut out instantly. He had silenced the room he was in. He was giving me his absolute, undivided attention. "Robert," I managed to say, each word costing me a fraction of my remaining strength. "He broke my leg, my ribs." Silence on the line. It was a cold, heavy silence. I could feel the temperature dropping in the room on the other side of the world. "Where are you?" Ethan asked. His voice had dropped an octave. It was no longer the voice of a protector. It was the voice of an executioner. "Basement," I sobbed, clutching the phone with both hands. Seattle house, cellar, concrete, cold. I took a jagged breath, the air rattling in my damaged lungs. "They are starving me. Ethan, they want me to sign, then they will kill me." "Who is with him?" The question was sharp, a tactical inquiry. "His mother, Martha, his sister, Sarah." I coughed, tasting copper. They are all watching me die. "Listen to me, Julia." The use of my first name, without the title, was a shock. He had never broken protocol before. It anchored me. "I am holding on," I whispered. "You need to stay awake," Ethan said. The calm in his voice was terrifying now. It was the calm before a tsunami. "Do not sign anything. Do not antagonize them. Make yourself small." "Can you do that?" "I am hurting, Ethan," I whimpered, the child in me reaching out to the only safety I had ever known. "I am so scared." "I know," he said, and for the first time, I heard a crack in his armor, a tremor of pure, unadulterated fury. "But the fear ends now. You are done being the victim. You are a Westfall. You hold the line." I nodded in the dark, tears streaming down my face. "Okay, I am coming for you," Ethan vowed. "I am launching the bird now. I will be on the ground in Seattle in 3 hours. Do not die. Julia, do not you dare die on me." 3 hours, I repeated, the words a mantra. 3 hours, he confirmed. "And Julia?" "Yes? When I get there, I am going to burn their world down. Close your eyes and wait for the thunder." The line went dead. The battery icon flashed once, a final dying wink, and the screen went black. I lowered the phone, clutching it to my chest like a holy relic. The silence of the basement returned, but it was different now. It was no longer the silence of the grave. It was the silence of a countdown. I slumped back against the rough brick wall, my energy spent. The fever washed over me again, pulling me down into the dark water. But this time, I did not fight it. I let myself drift. I had done my part. I had summoned the Reaper. 3 hours. Somewhere high above me, through the layers of wood and flooring, I heard a sound that made a twisted smile pull at my cracked lips. It was music, upbeat, cheerful pop music, and the smell. It wafted down through the cracks in the floorboards. The smoky, savory scent of charcoal and searing meat. They were having a barbecue. I closed my eyes and pictured it. Robert, standing by the grill in his Kiss the Cook apron, flipping burgers with the same hand that had shattered my leg. Martha, sipping iced tea on the patio, wearing my diamond necklace, complaining about the heat. Sarah, laughing at something on her phone, lounging on the outdoor furniture I had paid for. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought the woman in the basement was a helpless, broken thing that would fade away quietly, leaving them with a fortune and a clean slate. They were so drunk on their own greed that they could not hear the sound of the rotors turning in the distance. They could not feel the shift in the atmospheric pressure as a force of nature turned its gaze toward their suburban little hell. Let them eat, I thought as consciousness slipped away. Let them laugh. Let them enjoy the sun on their faces one last time, because the night is coming, and the night has a name. I curled around the dead phone, the pain in my leg a distant throb now. I was not alone anymore. The cavalry was coming, and they were not bringing handcuffs or Miranda rights. They were bringing fire. The rescue did not arrive with sirens or flashing lights. It arrived with the silence of a shadow passing over the moon. I was floating in a dark, feverish haze when the atmosphere in the house changed. I could not hear it, but I felt it. The vibrations of the house shifted. The refrigerator compressor upstairs, which had been humming a monotonous rhythm for days, suddenly cut out. The faint electric hum that permeates every modern home vanished. The darkness in the basement became absolute, a suffocating ink that swallowed the room whole. They had cut the power. Upstairs, Robert, Martha, and Sarah were likely sleeping the deep, drunken sleep of the victorious. They had celebrated my demise with cheap wine and burnt meat, unaware that the perimeter of their suburban castle had been breached by men who dismantled governments for a living. I heard the basement door handle turn. It was locked, of course. Robert had engaged the heavy deadbolt. In my delirium, I expected to hear the splintering of wood, a violent kick that would wake the dead. Instead, there was a soft, hydraulic hiss. It was the sound of a pneumatic spreader, a tool used by rescue crews to pry open crushed cars, applying thousands of pounds of pressure with the whisper of a breath. The wood groaned, a low protest that was swallowed by the earth. And then the lock sheared off with a muffled snap. The door swung open. 3 beams of infrared light cut through the gloom, sweeping the room with clinical precision. They did not bounce wildly. They moved with the fluid, synchronized discipline of apex predators. I tried to lift my head, but my neck muscles had turned to water. "Clear left," a voice whispered. It was a sound transmitted through a throat mic, barely audible. "Clear right. Target acquired." Boots moved across the concrete floor. They were soft-soled, tactical boots that made no sound on the dust. A figure kneeled beside me. The blinding beam of a tactical flashlight was diverted, and a red low-light filter was snapped on, bathing my prison in the color of blood. A face appeared in the crimson glow. It was a face carved from granite, scarred by years of violence in places the news never talked about. "Ethan," I breathed, the words scraping against my raw throat like glass. Ethan Blackwood did not speak immediately. He looked at my leg, swollen and purple, the bone pressing against the skin. He looked at the bruises on my arms, the hollows under my eyes, the filth matting my hair. For a terrifying second, the professional mask he wore, the mask of the CEO of Blackwood Global Security, cracked. His eyes, usually cold and unreadable, flared with a rage so profound, so volcanic, that the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His jaw clenched so hard, I saw the muscle feather beneath the skin. He reached out a gloved hand and touched my forehead. His touch was impossibly gentle, a stark contrast to the lethal potential coiled in his body. "I have her," he said into his comms. His voice was a low growl. "Condition critical. Sepsis is setting in. Bring the medic. Now." "Ethan," I tried again, grabbing his wrist with my weak, trembling hand. "You came." "I told you. Miss Westfall," he said, his voice tight. "I always answer the call." 2 other men materialized from the shadows. They were dressed in black tactical gear, faces covered by balaclavas, no insignias, no flags. One of them carried a medical kit that looked more like a mobile operating theater. He knelt beside me, bypassing pleasantries. In seconds, he had a tourniquet prepped, an IV line in my arm, and a morphine drip flowing into my veins. The relief was instantaneous, the jagged edge of the pain dulled. replaced by a warm, floating sensation. The medic worked with efficient, jerky movements, stabilizing the fracture with a temporary splint. "We need to move her," the medic whispered to Ethan. "Her vitals are thready. She needs a hospital, not a field dressing." Ethan nodded. He stood up, his height filling the small room. He looked at the ceiling, at the floorboards that separated us from the people who had done this. He reached for the suppressed pistol holstered at his side. The movement was fluid, automatic. "Get her to the extraction vehicle," Ethan commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "I have unfinished business upstairs." I knew what he intended to do. He was going to go upstairs. He was going to walk into the master bedroom, and he was going to put a bullet in Robert's brain. Then he would do the same for Martha and Sarah. He would do it efficiently, without hesitation. And he would sleep soundly afterwards. "No," I whispered. The morphine made my voice slur. But the command was clear. Ethan froze. He looked down at me, his hand still on the grip of his weapon. "They tortured you," he said. "It was not a question. They broke you for money. They forfeit their right to breathe." "If you kill them," I rasped, fighting the drug pulling me under. "They die. They do not suffer. They do not learn." I gripped his tactical vest, pulling myself up an inch. "I want them to live. Ethan, I want them to think they won. I want them to spend the money, and then I want to take it all back. I want them to watch their paradise fall. Brick by brick, I want to be the one who destroys them." Ethan looked at me for a long moment. The red light cast deep shadows on his face. He was weighing the tactical advantage of a clean kill against the strategic cruelty of my request. Slowly, his hand released the pistol grip. A dark, terrifying approval entered his eyes. "As you wish," he said. "Scorched earth it is." He turned to his team. "Change of plan. Initiate protocol Cicada." The team moved with a frightening speed. While the medic and one operative lifted me onto a collapsible stretcher, another operative brought in a large, heavy duffel bag. He unzipped it. Inside was a body. It was a female cadaver, procured through the shadowy networks that Blackwood Security operated within, likely an unclaimed body from a morgue in Eastern Europe or a medical donation diverted from a university. It was roughly my height, my build. "Is that?" I stared, horrified and fascinated. "A biological stand-in," Ethan said simply. "Synthetic skin over real bone structure. Once it burns, dental records will be the only way to tell, and we have already swapped the files at your dentist's office remotely." He knelt beside me and gently took my left hand. He slid the simple gold wedding band off my finger, the ring Robert had given me 3 years ago, a symbol of a love that was now a rotting corpse. Ethan walked over to the cadaver and slid the ring onto its cold, stiff finger. "Goodbye, Julia Caldwell," he murmured. The operatives placed the body in the corner of the room, near where I had been lying. They arranged it in a fetal position, mimicking how they had found me. "Gas line?" Ethan asked. "Rigged," the demolition expert replied. "I have bypassed the safety valve on the furnace pilot light. We are flooding the room with natural gas. One spark from the remote detonator, and this entire basement becomes an incinerator." "We have 2 minutes," Ethan said. "Move." They carried me out. The ascent was a blur. We did not go through the house. They took me out through the external storm doors of the cellar, into the cool, wet night air of the backyard. The rain had stopped, leaving the grass slick and shining. A black, unmarked van was waiting in the alleyway behind the garden fence. They loaded me into the back, which was equipped like an intensive care unit. As the doors closed, sealing me in with the medical equipment and the hum of monitors, I saw Ethan standing by the back gate, holding a small remote trigger in his hand. He looked at his watch. He waited until the van engine purred to life. Then, without looking back at the house, he pressed the button. The sound was not a bang. It was a whump, a deep, guttural intake of breath followed by a violent expulsion. Through the tinted rear window, I saw the ground floor windows of the house blow out. A fireball, orange and angry, rolled out of the cellar storm doors, licking up the side of the Victorian siding. The gas explosion had been calibrated perfectly. It was not enough to level the house instantly, but enough to gut the basement and start a structural fire that would consume the lower levels rapidly. As the van pulled away, sliding silently into the suburban streets, I saw lights flickering on in the neighboring houses. I imagined the scene inside my home. The shockwave would have thrown Robert from his bed. The smoke alarms would be screaming now, a piercing wail to replace the silence. I closed my eyes, letting the morphine take me, visualizing the panic. Robert would be stumbling through the hallway, coughing in the smoke. He would grab Martha. He would grab Sarah. They would scramble down the stairs, their eyes stinging, their lungs burning. They would run out onto the lawn, gasping for air, watching the flames dance in the living room window. And then, Robert would realize, Julia, he would not be thinking of me. He would be thinking of the papers I had not signed. He would be thinking of the witness in the basement. By the time the fire trucks arrived, their sirens wailing like mourners, the basement would be an inferno. The firefighters would fight the blaze for 2 hours. When the smoke finally cleared and the sun rose over Seattle, they would send a team down into the charred, waterlogged ruins. They would find a body, burned beyond recognition, curled in a corner, wearing a gold wedding band. Robert would stand on the lawn, wrapped in a blanket provided by a sympathetic neighbor. He would fall to his knees when the fire chief delivered the news. He would scream my name. He would weep into his hands, his shoulders shaking with the force of his grief. The neighbors would look at him with pity, whispering about the poor man who lost his wife in a tragic accident. But behind his hands, behind the facade of the grieving widower, Robert would be smiling. He would feel a rush of euphoria so potent it would make him dizzy. He would think he was free. He would think the problem had incinerated itself. He would think the money was now his, uncontested. He did not know that the woman he thought he had killed was watching him from the back of a black van, speeding toward a private airstrip. He did not know that he had not just buried his wife. He had planted the seeds of his own destruction. "Sleep now, Miss Westfall." Ethan's voice came over the intercom from the front seat. "We are going to Switzerland. When you wake up, you will have a new face and a new name." "No," I whispered into the darkness of the van. "Not a new name. The old one. The only one that matters." The fire was fading in the distance, but the fire inside me was just beginning to burn. The hunt had begun. Time is a relative concept. For the dead, it does not exist. For the mourning, it drags like a heavy chain. But for the wicked who believe they have gotten away with murder, time is a high-speed highway paved with gold. And for me, lying in a sterile white room in the Swiss Alps, time was a scalpel. It carved away the soft, sentimental parts of Julia Caldwell and left behind something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. 6 months. That was how long it took for the metamorphosis to complete. It began with the money. Ethan Blackwood, operating from the shadows, orchestrated the insurance payout with terrifying efficiency. He pulled strings at the highest levels of the actuarial world to ensure there was no investigation, no delay, and no suspicion. 3 weeks after the fire, a check for $2,500,000 was deposited into Robert's account. It was the payout from a life insurance policy I had taken out years ago. Combined with the settlement for the house, Ethan called it fattening the calf. He wanted them rich. He wanted them drowning in liquidity. He knew that money is the ultimate sedative for the conscience. If they were busy spending, they would not be looking over their shoulders. While Robert was staring at the zeros in his bank account with a dilated, drug-like euphoria, I was staring at the ceiling of a private clinic in Zurich. My leg had been shattered, the bone infected. The doctors, the best trauma surgeons money could buy, had to re-break the tibia to set it correctly. They inserted a titanium rod from my knee to my ankle, screwed into place with bolts that I could feel vibrating whenever a storm rolled over the mountains. The pain was a white noise that never turned off. I spent weeks in traction, sweating through the sheets, biting down on a leather strap during the dressing changes, But I did not scream. I saved my breath. Every throb of agony in my leg was a reminder of the golf club. Every ache in my healing ribs was a memory of the floor. I hoarded the pain. I let it calcify into hatred. Back in Seattle, the Caldwells were proving Ethan right. They did not grieve. They consumed. Robert bought a Porsche 911 within 48 hours of the check clearing. He bought it in a screaming bright red, a color that shouted for attention. He drove it around Seattle like a king, revving the engine at stoplights, desperate for the envy of strangers. He rented a massive, modernist penthouse in downtown Seattle, while he commissioned architects to build a monstrosity of a mansion on the ashes of our old home. He wanted pillars. He wanted gold leaf trim. He wanted a monument to his own ego. Martha was no better. The woman who had cried about being destitute was now draped in gaudy jewelry. She bought heavy gold chains, diamond-encrusted brooches, and rings that made her arthritic fingers look like sausages wrapped in tinfoil. She walked into high-end boutiques and demanded service, treating the staff with the same imperious cruelty she had shown me. She told everyone who would listen that her son was a genius investor, that their fortune came from his brilliant mind, erasing my existence entirely. And Sarah? Sarah became a magnet for parasites. She bought a wardrobe of designer clothes that she did not have the grace to wear. She started frequenting the VIP sections of the city's most expensive clubs, buying tables and champagne for an entourage of sycophants. She found a boyfriend named Kyle, an aspiring DJ with a neck tattoo and a sob story about needing capital for his record label. Sarah gave him $50,000 of Robert's money without blinking. Convinced she was investing in the next big thing, I watched it all. Ethan brought me dossiers every week. I lay in my hospital bed, surrounded by the pristine silence of the snow-covered Alps, and flipped through photos of their debauchery. I saw Robert laughing at a steakhouse, a glass of 50-year-old scotch in his hand. I saw Martha getting a mud bath at a spa. I saw Sarah stumbling out of a club at 3 a.m. "They are disgusting," I said one morning, tossing a photo of Robert onto the side table. "They are predictable," Ethan corrected. He was sitting in the corner, reading a financial report. "They are burning through the cash rate of $400,000 a month. At this pace, they will be liquidating assets by Christmas." "Good," I said. "Let them starve." "No." Ethan closed the folder. "Starvation is too slow. We do not want them poor. We want them destroyed. And for that, you need to be ready." The physical transformation began in the 3rd month. My face, while not severely damaged in the fire, was too recognizable. I needed to be a ghost. I needed to walk past my husband in a crowded room and have him feel nothing but a vague sense of attraction to a stranger. I underwent a series of subtle but profound surgeries. The surgeons shaved down the bridge of my nose, giving it a sharper, more aristocratic slope. They injected fillers into my cheekbones to create a higher, more angular structure. They lifted my brow, opening my eyes wider, and laser-treated my skin to remove the few freckles I had always hated. When the bandages came off, I looked in the mirror and did not recognize the woman staring back. Julia Caldwell, the soft, round-faced librarian with the kind eyes, was gone. The woman in the mirror was striking, severe, and predatory. "You look like a weapon," Ethan said, standing behind me. "I am a weapon," I replied. My voice had changed too. I had worked with a vocal coach to drop my pitch, to smooth out the slight Texas twang I had suppressed but never fully lost. Replacing it with a transatlantic accent that sounded like old money in boardrooms, I bleached my hair, not the warm honey blonde of my youth, but a stark, icy platinum that looked almost white. I cut it into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed my new jawline like a helmet. I was no longer Julia. I was Victoria Vane. The name was my own choice. Victoria for the victory I would claim. Vane for the weather vane that changes with the wind. Because I would be whatever I needed to be to break him. The physical therapy was brutal. I had to learn to walk again. The titanium rod held my leg together, but the muscles had atrophied. I spent 6 hours a day in the gym, pushing through tears and sweat. I lifted weights until my arms, once soft, were corded with lean muscle. I practiced Krav Maga with Ethan, learning how to disable a man twice my size. I learned how to use a knife. I learned how to break a wrist. I learned that the body is just a machine, and pain is just a signal you can choose to ignore. But the most important training happened at the desk. Ethan became my professor in the art of corporate warfare. I was a Westfall, so I had business in my blood, but I had ignored it for years. Now, I drank it. I studied market trends, hostile takeovers, leverage buyouts, and forensic accounting. I learned how to spot a weak company, how to bleed it dry, and how to acquire it for pennies on the dollar. I established Nemesis Capital, a venture capital firm registered in the Cayman Islands, a subsidiary of a shell company owned by the Westfall Trust. It was a ghost ship, loaded with billions of dollars of firepower, and I was the captain. Meanwhile, in Seattle, the cracks were starting to show. 6 months of unrestrained gluttony takes a toll. Robert had gained 20 pounds. His face was puffy from alcohol and rich food. The Porsche had a scratch on the bumper that he was too lazy to fix. But more importantly, the money was running low. The $2 million was nearly gone. The renovation on the new house had stalled because the contractors walked off the job when the checks started bouncing. Martha had lost $300,000 in a cryptocurrency scam that promised her a 10,000% return. She had been so greedy, so eager to prove she was smarter than everyone else, that she had wired the money to a complete stranger on the internet. Sarah's boyfriend, the DJ, had vanished with the $50,000 and her collection of vintage watches. Sarah was back on the couch, crying about how unfair the world was, drinking the cheap wine again because the Pinot Noir was gone. Robert was starting to panic. I could see it in the surveillance reports. He was checking his bank balance 5 times a day. He was yelling at Martha. He was blaming Sarah. The happy family facade had crumbled, revealing the rats fighting in the sack beneath. He needed an influx of cash. He needed a job. But Robert Caldwell was a mediocre architect who had not worked in 6 months. His reputation was that of a lottery winner who had gotten lazy. No reputable firm wanted to hire him. This was the opening. "He is desperate," Ethan said. Placing a tablet on my desk, the screen showed an email Robert had sent to his old boss at Summit Stone Architecture, begging for his job back. "He is crawling back to the start." I picked up the tablet. My hand, manicured with sharp, blood-red nails, did not tremble. "Summit Stone is a mid-sized firm," I said, reciting the data I had memorized. "They are currently over-leveraged on a commercial project in downtown Bellevue. Their liquidity is low. The partners are looking for a buyout." Ethan smiled. It was a rare, shark-like expression. "Exactly. They are ripe for acquisition." I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of the clinic. The snow was falling outside, blanketing the world in white silence. I felt the titanium in my leg ache, a dull, familiar friend. "Buy it?" I said. "The whole firm?" Ethan asked. "Everything," I replied, turning to face him. "Buy Summit Stone Architecture. I want majority control. I want my name on the building, and I want to be the one who decides who they hire." "It will cost $40 million, Ethan noted. "Pocket change," I said. "Prepare the jet. Ethan, we are going back to America." I walked over to the mirror one last time. Victoria Vane stared back at me. She was cold. She was beautiful. She was terrifying. There was no trace of the woman who had begged for her life in a basement. That woman was dead. I had killed her so that Victoria could live. "He wants a job?" I whispered to my reflection. "I will give him a job. I will give him the job of his life, and then I will fire him from existence." I picked up my coat, a black trench coat that cost more than Robert's car. I slipped it on, the silk lining cool against my skin. "Let's go hunting," I said. The flight back to the States was smooth. As we descended into Seattle, I looked out the window at the gray, rain-soaked city. It looked the same as when I had left, but everything was different. I was not returning as a fugitive or a victim. I was returning as a conqueror. The chessboard was set. The king was exposed. Fat and lazy and stupid. The queen was dead, and the new player on the board was about to make the first move. Robert Caldwell thought he had buried his past. He was about to find out that the past does not stay buried when you plant it in a shallow grave. It grows. It grows into a garden of thorns. And I was bringing the harvest. I touched the scar on my shin through the fabric of my trousers. I am coming for you. Husband, I thought, and this time, I am the one holding the club. The acquisition of Summit Stone architecture was executed with the precision of a scalpel. On a rainy Tuesday morning, the entire staff was summoned to the main conference room. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and anxiety. Rumors of bankruptcy had been circulating for weeks, and the partners looked like men facing a firing squad. I entered the room exactly 3 minutes late. It is a power move Ethan taught me. Make them wait. Make them sweat. I wore a tailored white suit that cost more than the average annual salary of the people in that room. My platinum hair was slicked back, sharp enough to cut glass. Behind me walked Ethan, now posing as my chief of security and personal advisor. Looking like a monolith in a dark suit, the room fell silent. I walked to the head of the table, where the managing partner, a sweating man named Mr. Henderson, hurriedly vacated his seat. "Good morning," I said. My voice was low, modulated, carrying the chill of the Swiss Alps. "I am Victoria Vane, CEO of Nemesis Capital. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I own this building, the intellectual property within it, and the debt that was drowning you." I scanned the room. My eyes landed on him. Robert was sitting near the back, looking disheveled. His suit was tight around the waist, the weight gain from 6 months of gluttony. He looked bored, arrogant, until he saw me. When our eyes met, his jaw actually dropped. He stared at me with a mixture of lust and confusion. He did not see Julia. He saw a billionaire ice queen who radiated power. The plastic surgery, the hair, the attitude, it was a perfect disguise. But the most effective camouflage was his own narcissism. He simply could not conceive that the mouse of a wife he had murdered could be the lioness standing before him. "We are restructuring," I announced, keeping my gaze moving so as not to linger on him too long. "Inefficiency will be cut, talent will be rewarded, and we are starting with the Helios project." The room gasped. The Helios project was a legendary, cursed contract, a massive skyscraper proposed for downtown Seattle that had stalled due to impossible engineering challenges and budgetary nightmares. It was a career killer. "I need a visionary to lead it," I said, walking slowly around the table. The clicking of my heels was the only sound in the room. I stopped behind Robert's chair. I could smell him, the stale scent of fear and cheap cologne. "Mr. Caldwell, is it?" Robert scrambled to stand up, knocking his pen off the table. Yes, Ms. Vane." "Robert Caldwell. I have reviewed your personnel file, Robert," I lied smoothly. "You have been underutilized here. Your portfolio shows ambition." Robert puffed out his chest. "I have always said that, Ms. Vane, I just needed the right opportunity." "Well, now you have it," I smiled, a predator baring its teeth. "I am promoting you to project director of Helios. You will have full autonomy, an unlimited budget, monitored by me, of course, and a corner office. But Robert?" "Yes?" He was practically drooling. "I expect results. The timeline is aggressive. Do not disappoint me." He looked like he had won the lottery. He did not know I had just handed him a live grenade and pulled the pin. The Helios project was structurally impossible with the current zoning laws. Laws I knew he was too lazy to check. He would fail. But before he failed, he would be desperate. The torture began slowly. I moved into the office next to his. I ordered the ventilation system adjusted so that air from my office drifted into his. Then, I applied the perfume, L'Heure Bleue by Guerlain. It was the scent I had worn every day as Julia. It was distinct, powdery, and melancholic. I watched him on the hidden cameras installed in his new office. The first time he smelled it, he froze. He looked around wildly, sniffing the air like a confused dog. He stood up, checked the hallway, and sat back down, rubbing his temples. He looked pale. Later that afternoon, I called him into my office for a briefing, as he laid out blueprints that were nonsensical. I leaned back in my chair, tapping a pen against my lips. "Tell me, Robert," I asked casually. "You seem distracted. Is everything all right at home?" "Fine," he stammered, his eyes glued to my neckline. "Everything is fine, just adjusting to the new responsibilities." "Good," I said. "A man's home life is his foundation. I imagine your wife is very proud of your promotion?" He flinched. It was subtle, a twitch of the left eye. I am a widower. Ms. Vane, my wife passed away 6 months ago." "Oh, how tragic," I said, injecting a note of dark amusement into my voice. "An accident?" "A fire," he said, clearing his throat. "A gas leak. It was very sudden." "Fire purifies," I murmured, staring straight into his eyes. "But ash is so hard to wash off, isn't it?" He stared at me, unsettled. "I suppose so. You remind me of someone." "Robert," I said, standing up and walking around the desk to stand uncomfortably close to him. "Someone who takes what he wants. I like that." He left my office thinking I was flirting with him. He was so delusional, so desperate for validation, that he interpreted my predatory stalking as sexual interest. The pressure of the Helios project ramped up. I set impossible deadlines. I demanded architectural renderings that defied physics. Robert was drowning. He began staying late, drinking at his desk, and just as I predicted, he needed money. The unlimited budget I promised came with strict oversight protocols that he did not understand, to cover the gambling debts that Martha was still racking up, and to maintain his appearance as a high roller for me. He began to skim. It was clumsy at first. He inflated vendor invoices. He created a fake consulting firm and billed the company for structural analysis. I saw every transaction. I approved them all. I was giving him enough rope to hang himself, braiding the noose with every illicit transfer, while I dismantled Robert at the office. I unleashed psychological hell on his home. My target for Martha was her superstition. The woman was evil, but she was also a coward who believed in ghosts and bad omens. I still had the inventory of items she had stolen from me. I knew exactly what she loved. I had a custom jeweler in Zurich create a replica of the pearl earrings she had stolen, the ones Robert had gaslit me about. I had them placed in a small, velvet box. I hired a courier to deliver them to the penthouse with no return address. Inside the box, I included a note written on stationery that looked exactly like the library slips I used to use. The note read, "I found these in the trash. Thought you might want them back." According to the audio bugs Ethan had planted in the penthouse, the reaction was spectacular. "It is her!" Martha shrieked. I could hear the sound of glass breaking. "She is haunting us! I told you we should have burned the house down completely!" "Shut up. Mother," Robert yelled. "It is a prank. Someone knows. Sarah, did you tell anyone?" "I didn't tell anyone," Sarah screamed back. "Maybe you have a stalker." 2 days later, I sent the second gift. It was a bottle of the perfume I wore, the same one I was using to torment Robert at the office. I had it delivered to Martha's bedroom, placed on her pillow by an operative who bypassed their pathetic security system. The note this time was simpler. "It smells like the basement down here. Martha had a breakdown. She hired a priest. She hired a medium. She started burning sage until the fire alarms went off. She smashed all the mirrors in the penthouse because she claimed she saw my reflection standing behind her." The neighbors in the luxury building began to complain about the screaming and the smell of burning herbs. They were becoming pariahs. Sarah was the easiest to dismantle. She was greedy and stupid, a fatal combination. I had Ethan's team fabricate a persona. Julian, a wealthy, mysterious crypto investor with a bad boy edge, one of Ethan's younger operatives, a man with the charm of a viper, played the role. He met Sarah at a club. He bought her drinks. He told her she had the look of a model. Within a week, she was in love. Within 2 weeks, Julian let her in on a secret investment opportunity. He told her he could double her money in 24 hours. But she needed to bring cash. Sarah stole from Robert's stash. She stole his watches. She pawned the designer bags she had stolen from me. She gave Julian $50,000. He ghosted her the next morning. But he did not just leave. He leaked photos of her doing cocaine in the club to the tabloids. Sarah was not famous, but Robert's new position as the director of the Helios project made him a minor public figure. The headline, "Sister of Helios Director in Drug-Fueled Scandal," was the cherry on top. Robert was furious. He slapped Sarah. He screamed at Martha. The penthouse was a war zone. To tighten the screw, I invited Robert to dinner. I chose the most expensive restaurant in Seattle, a place that sat atop a skyscraper with a view of the city lights. I wore a black dress that was cut dangerously low, revealing the scar on my collarbone, a scar from the night of the beating. Though I told him it was a skiing accident, Robert was sweating in his tuxedo. He looked exhausted, haunted, and terrified. Yet he still looked at me with that pathetic, hungry hope. He thought I was his savior. He thought if he could just bed the billionaire CEO, all his problems would vanish. We drank vintage wine. I let him talk about the Helios project, nodding as he spun lies about its progress. "You know, Robert," I said, swirling the red liquid in my glass, "I value loyalty above all else, in business and in love." "I agree," he said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "Loyalty is everything." "I had a friend once," I said, leaning in. The candlelight danced in my eyes. She was married to a man she adored. She gave him everything, her heart, her home, her trust. And do you know what he did? Robert swallowed hard. "No." "What?" "He betrayed her," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "He stole from her, and when she caught him, he and his family hurt her, badly." Robert went rigid. His hand froze on his wineglass. "That is terrible." "It gets better," I continued, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes. "They thought she was dead. They thought they had buried her. But she survived. She crawled out of the grave, Robert, and she came back." I watched his pupils dilate. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. He was making the connection, but his mind refused to accept it. It was too impossible. I was Victoria Vane. I was a billionaire. I could not be Julia. "What happened to the husband?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Oh," I laughed lightly, breaking the tension. "She destroyed him. She took his job, his money, his sanity. She left him with nothing. A fitting punishment. Don't you think?" "Yes," he whispered. "Fitting." But enough about sad stories," I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. His skin was cold and clammy. "I have noticed some irregularities in the project accounts. Robert," he yanked his hand back as if I had burned him. "Irregularities?" "Small things," I waved a hand dismissively. "Probably just clerical errors. But I will need to do a full audit next week, just to be safe. You understand?" "An audit," he choked out. "Yes, unless—" I paused, looking at him with mock sympathy. "Unless you are in some kind of trouble? You can tell me. Robert, I am very understanding." He looked at me. For a moment, he almost confessed. I could see it in his eyes, the urge to unburden himself, to beg for help. But his arrogance won out. He straightened his tie. "No trouble," he lied. "The audit will show everything is perfect." "I am sure it will," I said. "Now, drink up. We are celebrating." "Celebrating what?" he asked weakly. "The future," I said, raising my glass. "And what we deserve." Robert drank. He drank to drown the terror rising in his throat. He left the dinner thinking he had dodged a bullet, thinking he could fix the accounts before next week. He did not know that I already had the copies. He did not know that I had already sent the evidence to the district attorney. Holding off on pressing the send button until the perfect moment, he went home to a penthouse that smelled of sage and fear. He went home to a mother who was losing her mind and a sister who was bankrupting him. And all the while, he clung to the fantasy that Victoria Vane wanted him. He was a rat running in a maze I had built, and I was just waiting for him to reach the dead end. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered not by mail, but by a private courier who waited for a signature. It was a slab of heavy, matte black cardstock with silver lettering that embossed the fingertips. It was an invitation to the Nemesis Capital Annual Gala, the social event of the season, held at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. But for Robert Caldwell, it was not an invitation. It was a summons. The text was explicit. Mr. Robert Caldwell is requested to attend as the guest of honor to receive the Employee of the Year Award for his visionary leadership on the Helios project. Attendance of immediate family is mandatory. Mandatory. The word hung around Robert's neck like a noose. He sat in his office, the walls closing in on him. The audit was looming next week. He had managed to shuffle some funds, robbing Peter to pay Paul, moving money from the payroll account to cover the vendor fraud. But the hole was getting too deep to hide. He needed this award. He needed to cement his position with Victoria Vane. If he was the Employee of the Year, surely she would overlook a few accounting discrepancies. Surely she would protect her star player. But the requirement to bring his family was a disaster. Robert went home early. The penthouse smelled of burnt sage and cat litter, though they did not own a cat. Martha was sitting in the dark, clutching the replica pearl earrings I had sent her, rocking back and forth. Sarah was passed out on the sofa, wearing a stained bathrobe, surrounded by empty takeout containers. "Get up," Robert barked, kicking the coffee table. "We are going out on Saturday, and you are going to act like human beings." "I cannot go out," Martha whispered, her eyes darting to the shadows in the corner. "She is out there. Julia. I saw her in the reflection of the toaster oven. Bobby. She was burning." "Julia is dead," Robert screamed, grabbing his mother by the shoulders. "She is dead because we killed her. Now pull yourself together." Victoria Vane, the woman who owns us, the woman who holds my life in her hands, wants to meet you. If you mess this up, if you embarrass me, I will put you in a state home so fast your head will spin. The threat pierced through Martha's psychosis. She nodded slowly. Sarah groaned and rolled over, asking if there would be an open bar. The preparations were a humiliation. Robert had maxed out his last credit card. He could not afford to buy a new tuxedo, and his old one no longer fit his bloated frame. He had to go to a rental shop in a strip mall, enduring the sneer of the teenager behind the counter as he squeezed into a generic black suit that smelled of industrial dry cleaning chemicals. He forced Martha to wear an old gown she had salvaged from the fire, hidden in her trunk. It was dated and smelled of mothballs. Sarah, having pawned all her nice clothes for Julian, had to wear a dress from a discount rack that was 2 sizes too small, the fabric straining against her skin. They looked exactly like what they were, grifters playing dress-up. Saturday evening arrived with a storm. Rain lashed against the windows of the penthouse. Robert was pacing the living room, checking his watch every 30 seconds. The limousine, a stretch Hummer that was tacky and outdated, the only thing he could book without a deposit, was waiting downstairs. "Let's go," Robert yelled. "Now!" As he reached for the doorknob, his phone pinged. It was not a text. It was an email. The notification flashed on his lock screen. Sender, unknown. Subject, remember this? Robert frowned. He swiped the screen to open it. The blood drained from his face so fast it left him dizzy. He staggered back, clutching the hallway table for support. It was a photo, a high-resolution, grainy but unmistakable still image. It showed a living room. It showed a woman cowering on the floor, her arm raised in defense, and standing over her, face twisted in a rictus of rage, holding a golf club mid-swing, was Robert. It was the night, it was the moment before he shattered my leg. A noise of pure, animal terror escaped his throat. He dropped the phone. It landed face up, the image staring back at him. "What is it?" Sarah asked. Walking out of her room, struggling with a zipper, Robert looked at his sister. Then he looked at his mother, his mind, already fractured by stress and paranoia, shattered completely. He did not think of Julia. Julia was dead. He had seen the fire. He had buried the body. No, this photo had to come from someone inside the room. "You," Robert whispered, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. "You took this." "What?" Sarah looked confused. "Took what?" "You recorded it," Robert roared. Lunging at her, he grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her violently. "You and Mom. You set me up. You kept insurance. Didn't you? You sent this to blackmail me." "Get off me," Sarah screamed, clawing at his face. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Liar!" Robert slapped her. The sound echoed in the empty hallway. "Who did you send it to? Did you send it to Vane? Is that why she invited us? To arrest me?" Martha began to wail. "It is the ghost. It is Julia's ghost. She sees everything." "Shut up about the ghost." Robert turned on his mother. "It was you, you greedy old witch. You want the money for yourself." They fought all the way down in the elevator. They fought as they climbed into the tacky limousine. The driver raised the partition immediately, terrified by the screaming coming from the back. "If anyone says a word," Robert hissed, straightening his crooked rental tie as the car sped toward the hotel. "If anyone steps out of line, I will kill you myself. I mean it. I will finish what I started in that basement." He looked at his phone again. He tried to reply to the email, typing frantically. "Who is this? What do you want?" "I have money." The reply came instantly. "I do not want your money. I want your soul." Robert threw the phone onto the floor of the car. He was hyperventilating. He looked out the window at the passing city lights, and every shadow looked like a prison bar. The Fairmont Olympic was glowing like a beacon. Valets in white jackets were opening doors for Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. The red carpet was flanked by photographers. When the tacky Hummer pulled up, a ripple of distaste went through the crowd. Robert stepped out. He was sweating profusely. His face was flushed, and there was a scratch on his cheek from Sarah's fingernails. Martha stumbled out after him, looking like a deer caught in headlights, clutching her purse as if it contained the nuclear codes. Sarah followed, sulking, pulling at her tight dress. They walked the gauntlet. The photographers did not flash their bulbs for them. They lowered their cameras, whispering to each other. Robert felt their judgment like a physical weight. Inside, the ballroom was transformed. It was a vision of black and chrome. The centerpieces were sculptures of jagged steel. The lighting was low and blue. It felt less like a party and more like the inside of a machine. "Stay here," Robert ordered his family, shoving them toward a table near the back. "Do not talk to anyone. Do not eat. Just sit there and look normal." He scanned the room, his eyes frantic. He needed to find Victoria. He needed to explain. He needed to tell her that whatever she had received, if she had received that photo, was a fake. A deep fake. A conspiracy by his enemies. He saw her. I was standing near the stage, surrounded by a circle of Seattle's elite. I wore a gown of liquid silver that pooled around my feet. My back was to him, but he recognized the platinum hair, the posture of absolute command. Robert started to push through the crowd. He was desperate. He needed to touch the hem of my garment, to beg for sanctuary. "Victoria!" he called out, his voice cracking. "Miss Vane!" He was 5 feet away when a wall of muscle blocked his path. Ethan Blackwood did not push him. He simply stepped into the space Robert intended to occupy. Ethan was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like armor. He looked down at Robert with eyes that were as cold as the bottom of the ocean. "Mr. Caldwell," Ethan said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Robert's chest. "You are encroaching. I need to speak to her," Robert panted, trying to look around Ethan's shoulder. "It is urgent. Personal matter. Ms. Vane is preparing for her address, Ethan said. You will return to your table. You do not understand. Robert grabbed Ethan's arm. Someone is trying to frame me. I need her help. Ethan looked at Robert's hand on his sleeve. Then he looked at Robert's face. He smiled. A terrifyingly sharp expression. Frame you? Ethan whispered. Or expose you? Robert froze. Who are you? I am the security, Ethan said. And you are insecure. Sit down. Robert, enjoy the show. You have a front row seat to your own funeral. Ethan shoved him lightly, but the force sent Robert stumbling back 3 steps. He looked around. People were staring. He retreated, slinking back to the table where Martha was weeping into a napkin and Sarah was chugging a stolen glass of champagne. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice boomed over the speakers, silencing the room instantly. The lights dimmed until only a single spotlight cut through the darkness. Illuminating the stage, I walked out. I did not walk with a limp. I walked with the predatory grace of a panther. I stood at the podium, gripping the edges with hands that glittered with diamond rings that looked suspiciously like the ones I had lost in the fire, only bigger, sharper. Welcome, I said. My voice was amplified, crisp and clear. Tonight, we celebrate success, we celebrate vision, but most importantly, we celebrate truth. Robert was trembling at his table. He felt the trap closing, but he could not see the mechanism. Nemesis Capital believes in stripping away the old to build the new, I continued. Looking out over the sea of faces, we believe that corruption, like rot in a building, must be exposed before it destroys the foundation. I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Tonight, before we present the Employee of the Year award, I have a special announcement, a personal project that is very close to my heart. I gestured to the massive LED screen behind me. The logo of Nemesis Capital faded. I am launching a new foundation dedicated to the victims of domestic violence, I said. A sanctuary for those who have been silenced, beaten, and buried by the people who claim to love them. Robert stopped breathing. Martha dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. I am calling it, I said, leaning into the microphone, my eyes locking onto the dark corner where the Caldwells sat. The Julia Sanctuary. The name hit the room like a physical blow. For most people, it was just a name, but for the 3 people at table 42, it was a resurrection. Julia, Martha whimpered. She knows. Shut up, Robert hissed, tears of panic pricking his eyes. It is a coincidence. It has to be. Is it? Sarah whispered, her face pale. Look at her. Rob, look at her eyes. Domestic violence is a silent epidemic, I continued, my voice gaining strength. It happens behind closed doors, in affluent suburbs, in Victorian houses with wine cellars. Robert gripped the tablecloth. His knuckles were white. Wine cellars. She knew. She knew everything. But how? Was she a cop? Was she an FBI agent? We often ask why the victims stay, I said. We ask why they do not leave, but we rarely ask what happens when they try. We rarely ask about the broken bones, the starvation, the theft. I pressed a button on the remote I held in my hand. Sometimes, I said, the only way to get justice is to rise from the ashes. The screen behind me flickered. It did not show a logo. It showed static. Then, it was resolved into a video. It was black and white. Night vision. The room gasped. The video showed a living room. It showed a man striking a woman with a golf club. The audio was crisp. The sickening crack of the bone breaking echoed through the ballroom's high-fidelity sound system. Then the video cut. It showed a new angle. A basement. A woman lying on a concrete floor. Filthy. Emaciated. A man in a blue suit walking down, throwing papers at her face. Sign them, the man in the video said. His voice was unmistakable. Sign them, or you die here. The crowd turned as one. 500 heads swiveled toward the table 42. Robert stood up. His chair fell backward with a crash. He looked at the screen. then at the crowd, then at me. He realized then that there was no blackmail. There was no third party. "No," he mouthed. "No, no, no." He looked at the exit doors. They were 50 feet away. He could run. He could make it. He scrambled away from the table, shoving a waiter aside. "Out of my way!" he screamed. He ran toward the double doors at the back of the room. He reached for the handles. They did not budge. Standing in front of the doors were two massive security guards. They crossed their arms. Robert spun around. He ran to the side exit. Blocked. He ran to the kitchen entrance. Blocked. He was trapped in the center of the ballroom, under the blue lights, with the video of his own cruelty playing on a loop behind him, enormous as a billboard. He turned back to the stage. He looked at me. I stood there, calm, radiant, terrible. I reached up and slowly, deliberately, pulled the platinum wig from my head. My hair underneath was shorter, darker, growing out, but it was the hair he remembered. I took a tissue from the podium and wiped the dark red lipstick from my mouth. The gasp from the crowd was a wave of sound, but Robert did not gasp. He made a sound like a dying animal. I looked straight at him. The camera zoomed in on my face, projecting it onto the screen, overlaying the image of his victim. I leaned into the microphone. I did not shout. I whispered, and the sound carried to every corner of the room. "Hello, husband." The silence that followed my whisper was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and pregnant with violence. The ballroom, moments ago filled with the polite murmur of Seattle's elite, was now a tomb. The only sound was the massive LED screen behind me, playing the high-definition footage of my torture on a loop. Crack. The sound of the golf club shattering my tibia, amplified through the state-of-the-art speakers. It echoed off the crystal chandeliers and the steel sculptures. It was a sound so wet, so visceral, that I saw a woman in the front row cover her mouth and turn away. Retching. Crack. The video shifted. It showed Martha, standing over my broken body in the basement, laughing as she kicked dirt onto my face. It showed Sarah eating a sandwich while I begged for water. The crowd did not just gasp. They recoiled. It was a collective physical rejection of the monsters standing at table 42. A low rumble of revulsion started at the back of the room and swept forward like a tide. "It is a lie!" The scream tore from Robert's throat. Ragged and desperate, he was standing in the center of the room, his face a mask of purple fury and sheer terror. The veins in his neck were bulging, pulsing with the erratic rhythm of a heart that knew its time was up. "It is a deep fake!" Robert roared, spinning around to face the accusers surrounding him. "Technology! AI! She made it up! That is not me! I loved my wife! I grieved for her!" He pointed a shaking finger at the screen, then at me. "She is a witch! She is trying to steal my company! Do not believe her!" But nobody was looking at him with doubt. They were looking at him with the cold, hard clarity of truth. The camera does not lie, and the man on the screen wore the same watch, the same shoes, and the same cruelty as the man in the tuxedo. "Liar!" someone shouted from the back. "Monster!" another voice cried out. The judgment of the crowd acted like a physical blow to Robert. He staggered, his eyes darting wildly. He looked at his mother, who was clutching her chest, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He looked at Sarah, who was trying to hide under the table. He was alone. And then, the fear turned into something else. It turned into the cornered, rabid aggression of a predator who has nothing left to lose. He looked at me. I was standing on the edge of the stage, looking down at him with the impassive judgment of a god. I was the source of his pain. I was the architect of his ruin. If he could just reach me, if he could just silence me, maybe the nightmare would end. "You bitch!" Robert screamed. He lowered his shoulder and charged. He moved with a surprising speed, fueled by adrenaline and madness. He knocked over a waiter, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the floor. He leaped over a floral arrangement. He was coming for my throat. His hands were curled into claws, ready to strangle the life out of the woman who had dared to survive him. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I did not even blink, because I knew who was standing in the shadows of the stage stairs. Ethan Blackwood stepped out. He did not draw a weapon. He did not shout a command. He moved with the fluid, devastating grace of a man who has spent a lifetime turning violence into an art form. As Robert reached the stairs, sprinting up them with murder in his eyes, Ethan simply waited. He waited until Robert was fully committed, his weight forward, his momentum unstoppable. Then, Ethan moved. It was a single kick, a low, sweeping arc of a leg that was as hard as an iron bar. Ethan aimed with surgical precision. He did not aim for the head or the chest. He aimed for the left leg, specifically, the tibia, the exact same bone that Robert had shattered on me 6 months ago. Snap. The sound was louder than the video. It was the dry, sickening crack of living bones snapping under immense pressure. Robert's leg folded inward at an unnatural angle. His forward momentum threw him into the air, spinning him around before he crashed onto the hardwood stage. He landed in a heap, exactly at my feet. For a second, there was silence. Then, the screaming started. "My leg! Oh God! My leg!" Robert curled into a fetal ball, clutching his shin, writhing in agony. It was a mirror image. It was a perfect recreation of the scene in my living room, only this time, the victim was the villain, and the golf club was the leg of a man who loved me more than my husband ever had. I looked down at him. He was weeping, snot and tears mixing on his face, his expensive tuxedo ruined. "It hurts, doesn't it?" I asked. My voice was amplified by the microphone, calm and terrifyingly conversational. Robert looked up at me through his tears. His eyes were wide with shock. "You broke my leg. You broke mine first," I said simply. "Consider it a receipt." I reached up to my head, with a slow, deliberate motion. I unclipped the platinum blonde wig. I pulled it off, shaking my head to let my natural hair fall around my shoulders. It was shorter than before, a dark, rich chestnut brown. I took a napkin from the podium and wiped the dark crimson lipstick from my mouth, revealing my pale, natural lips. The transformation was complete. Victoria Vane dissolved, and standing in her place was the woman he thought he had incinerated. Robert stared at me. His brain was trying to process the impossible. "Julia," he wheezed. "But the fire, the body. I saw the ring." "You saw what you wanted to see," I said, crouching down so our faces were inches apart. "You wanted me dead so badly that you didn't check the teeth. Robert, you didn't check the DNA. You just took the money and bought a Porsche." "I thought you were dead," he sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand as if to touch a ghost. "I mourned you. Do not lie to me," I hissed, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper that only he could hear. "I watched you celebrate. I watched you drink wine while I was rotting in that basement. The Julia you married? The sweet, naive girl who just wanted a family? She did die. She died the night you locked her in the dark." I stood up, towering over him. "I am not Julia Caldwell. I am your nightmare. I am the consequences of your own greed." The double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open with a crash that shook the walls. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" A dozen officers in tactical gear swarmed the room, followed by uniformed police officers. They did not look confused. They moved with the certainty of men who had been briefed for hours. Ethan had given them everything. The forensic accounting of the embezzlement, the video evidence of the assault, the medical reports from Switzerland, the testimony regarding the attempted murder. 2 officers marched onto the stage. They hauled Robert up. He screamed in agony as his broken leg dragged across the floor. But they showed him no mercy. They slapped handcuffs on his wrists, pulling his arms behind his back. "Robert Caldwell," the lead officer announced, his voice booming. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, kidnapping, grand larceny, and the embezzlement of $5 million from Summit Stone Architecture." "It was her!" Robert shrieked, pointing at me with his head as they dragged him away. "She set me up. She is the mastermind. You have the right to remain silent, the officer said, pushing him toward the stairs. I suggest you use it. Across the room, chaos had erupted at table 42. Sarah was trying to run. She had kicked off her heels and was sprinting toward the kitchen exit, knocking over chairs. A female officer intercepted her, tackling her to the ground. Sarah screamed like a banshee, kicking and scratching, yelling that she was just a girl, that she didn't do anything. Sarah Caldwell, the officer said, zip-tying her hands. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and theft of property valued over $100,000. And then there was Martha. The matriarch of the Caldwell family did not run. She sat frozen in her chair, clutching the replica pearl earrings I had sent her. Her face had gone a terrifying shade of gray. Her mouth was drooping on one side. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, on the image of her own cruelty, as the officers approached her. She tried to stand. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a garbled, wet sound. She collapsed forward, hitting the table face first, sliding down into a pile of black silk and stolen gold. "We need a medic," an officer shouted. "Suspect is down. Possible stroke." I watched from the stage. I felt Ethan step up beside me. We watched as the paramedics rushed in, loading Martha onto a stretcher. She was alive, but she was broken. Her mind, unable to process the guilt and the terror, had simply shut down. She would likely spend the rest of her life in a prison hospital, trapped in a body that would not obey her. Just as she had trapped me in that cellar, there was no pity in my heart. There was only a cold, quiet stillness. The scales had balanced. The ballroom was clearing out. The guests were being ushered out by the police for statements. The show was over. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked quietly. "I am fine," I said, and I was. "Let's get some air," he suggested. We walked out through the backstage exit, away from the flashing lights of the paparazzi who were swarming the front entrance. We took the service elevator to the roof. The rain had stopped. The Seattle night air was cool and crisp, smelling of pine and ocean salt. I walked to the edge of the balcony and looked down. Below, the street was a carnival of red and blue lights. I saw Robert being shoved into the back of a squad car. I saw Sarah weeping as she was led into a van. I saw the ambulance carrying Martha speed away. Sirens wailing. They were gone. The fear was gone. The shadow that had hung over my life for 3 years had been banished by the light of truth. I took a deep breath. It filled my lungs, expanding my ribs that had healed, strong and whole. I was no longer the girl who ran away from Texas. I was no longer the wife who apologized for existing. I was Julia Westfall. I was the heir to a kingdom, and I had just conquered my first territory. Ethan walked up behind me. He took off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over my shoulders. The warmth was grounding. "It is done," he said. "Yes," I replied, pulling the jacket tighter. "It is done." "What now?" he asked. "Do we go back to Zurich?" I looked out at the skyline of the city. I looked at the crane of the Helios project in the distance, a project that now belonged to me. "No," I said, turning to face him. My eyes were dry, clear, and focused. "We stay. I have a company to run. I have an empire to build, and I have a feeling, Ethan, that this is just the beginning." I looked back at the street one last time. The police cars were turning the corner, fading into the night. I did not feel joy. Revenge is not sweet. It is necessary. It is the surgery that removes the cancer. It leaves a scar, but it allows you to live. "Let's go," I said, turning my back on the empty street. "I have a board meeting in the morning." I walked back inside, my heels clicking on the concrete. A steady, rhythmic sound. I was not walking away from my past. I was walking over it. I was the hunter now, and the world was wide open. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate justice. I hope it kept you on the edge of your seat as much as it did for me while telling it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or relaxing at home? Please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Julia's revenge. Did Robert get what he deserved? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Sweet Rose Drama. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the story, and press the hype button to help this video reach more people who love a good drama. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, stay strong and never let anyone extinguish your fire.